on the sofa there.
Testing, testing. Hello?
Sure, let me just keep this. Good to go.
Yeah.
All right.
I like that. That's even better. That guy's got a bit more hair. Nicer beard.
All right, thank you all. If everyone could sort of take their seats now, we're ready to get kicked off with our next session, where we're looking at how to ensure business continuity in the face of ongoing supply chain disruption. This session is being led by David Strauss, who's a principal with Broadband Success Partners. David, over to you.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. We'll wait for folks to quiet down a little. Oh, it's coming from there. Okay. Well, sorry, we got started a little late here, but let's dive right in. As we all know, the pandemic altered and disrupted all manner of supply chains, from potato chips to semiconductor chips and everything in between. Post-pandemic, we're experiencing the aftermath. This is further exacerbated by heightened elevated demand. So each of our distinguished panelists will share his perspective on this critical situation. Before doing so, let's have each of them introduce themselves briefly and explain why they're on this panel. So let's start with Aaron at the very end there.
Hey folks, Aaron Worley. I lead Zayo's technology organization. And in addition to doing the architecture engineering for Zayo's network, I'd say probably about the last year and a half, 2 years, I spent as much time focusing on our supply chain and working with our partners to ensure that we had the hardware we needed to build our network, as I actually did focusing on building our network.
Good afternoon, this is Fernando Garcia. I work for Ingenium IDP, which is a consulting engineering firm. We help companies design and build data centers, and we help them cope with supply chain constraints and changes and trade-offs in the whole construction cycle. Looking forward to this discussion.
Hi everyone, Dave Collier. As COO of Infinite Electronics, I'm responsible for global supply chain operations and making sure that all of our customers have the connectivity solutions that they need when they need it. And why I'm on this panel, you probably can't see it from out there, but I've got a lot of scars from the last 20 years in supply chain and a lot of great stories. So looking forward to the conversation.
So my name's David Bruce. I work for a company called Global Cloud Exchange, more commonly referred to as GCX. So for those of you who don't know us, we're a global subsea operator. In fact, we operate the largest privately owned subsea cable system in the world. I look after Asia Pac, Europe and US, and I'm really here today to act more from the sort of sales and customer management perspective of how the supply chain has impacted us.
I'm John Nolan. I'm Chief Development Officer for Bluebird Networks, which is a super regional fiber provider in the Midwest. I've been in a variety of roles over my career, and I know firsthand how supply chain and the disruption of supply chain can cause pain for the businesses we all operate.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. So, as you could tell from the introductions, we're going to get some diverse perspectives here. So the first question we have, and by the way, let me say that we'll allow time at the end for questions. But question number one, from each of your vantage points, what are the most significant supply chain issues in your business? And since this audience represents different segments of the telecommunications industry, could you opine on some of the supply chain distinctions between fiber networks, mobile networks, towers, data centers, and subsea cable. So with that, who wants to go first?
I'll kick it off. For Zayo, our core components really, so transport, electronics, fiber, we've experienced disruption across both. I'll say that currently we're hearing from our vendors that lead times are improving, but we're still digging out of a pretty big backlog, especially on our fiber cables as well as some of our optical components. But we've had good partnership with many of our major vendors, and that's helped us make sure that we get some of the key components that we need to keep building the network.
Yes, I mean, we're basically in transport as well, so we suffer the same issues. I mean, predominantly lead time is what's impacting us. It basically went from 3 months lead time for the equipment that we need to 12 months in a very short period of time, and it's subsequently come back to about 8 months now. But, our customers won't wait 8 months, so we've had to put in a lot of various ways of reducing that, which I'm sure we'll come on to later on.
Thank you.
I'll just add that supply chain is a contact sport. So if it's not cartels in Mexico that are slowing down or providing disruptions, it's conflicts in Sudan and blocking the Suez Canal. So I just think that yes, we've started to see things stabilize and we've started to see lead times come down, but the new normal is that we will encounter constant disruption. We need to plan for it. We need to be ready for it.
I'll just echo what you said about planning for it. Bluebird Network did a very good job of anticipating some of the disruptions that it was going to face, getting ahead of that to some extent, but the vendors that we all rely on, some of their upstream inputs, when they go bump in the night, can have a trickle-down effect and spill over onto all of us.
So I represent here the data center part of the equation, right? And when designing data center, it used to be about trading off between different technologies, looking for the best, most efficient components. Now it's all our design. It's heavily influenced by what's available. So we have to now specify and design big facilities, taking into account the lead times and availability. And oftentimes we have to redesign a whole set just because what we thought was going to come is not going to come, and we have to replace it with a different technology, different equipment, different. So it is an ongoing thing, right? It's a constant design process. Before we used to just deliver a set of drawings, that's it. Now it's a constant evolution of the same design, trying to accommodate for the supply chain. The other thing is, I think in the data center industry, at least, demand is so huge, is spiking so much, that I think we need to start getting used to supply chain being constrained and will be constrained, and it's part now of the planning process. So now our customers are starting to plan 2-3 years ahead and placing orders 18 months ahead of time, things like that, which is something, it didn't happen before. So it is changing, it is disrupting also the data center industry, but I think we need to learn to live in this new situation with constant constraints in the supply chain. And I'm not just referring to wars, Canal de Suez, or cartels. It's just because of the demand is way above our ability to supply.
Well, thank you, Fernando, and the rest of you as well. Your answer actually leads very smartly into the next question. So what preventive measures have you taken or will you take to de-risk your supply chains? I mean, keying off what Fernando just said, it sounds, and I'm wondering if you're all experiencing that, whereby you literally have had to take this sort of new normal into account in the way you conduct your businesses.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that organizations can make is to be caught off guard, to be surprised. So again, back to this notion of planning, I think it's having a council, getting the right folks in the room to identify potential risks and to begin to look at different dynamics. What's the risk of impact? What's the likelihood of this occurring? And starting to pick off those that are outside of your risk tolerance. So that may be simple things like moving away from single sourcing. It may be establishing deeper relationships with some of your strategic vendors. It may be even things like vertical integration plays. So I just think that having the conversation, putting this at the forefront, making it a priority is crucial.
I'd agree with David there. I think it's easy to get really comfortable and almost take your supply chain for granted when, if you miss something from a forecasting or a planning perspective, you can still have, call it an 8-week delivery interval, right? That gets you, pretty comfortable. You can land pretty softly on that safety net. And, in some cases, Zayo did, but, as we were starting to see signs of supply chain tightening up, we, implemented a supply chain program and, increased our pre-buy amounts, the amount of inventory that we carry, more sophisticated planning and collaboration with our partners to try and minimize the impact as much as possible. And then, other things that we're doing, we've stood up a proper supply chain org, brought in external consultants to help us, develop a proper program, and then, also really managing, tightly the amount of inventory that we're carrying to ensure that, we reduce our exposure as much as possible.
Aaron, if I could just add to that, I think taking the customer perspective is crucial there, because it's not only looking back into your supply chain, but determining which customers are most important and making sure you take care of them first, particularly if they're on a panel with you at a conference.
I would agree with that.
So one thought about what you guys are saying is, on top of the planning, programming, and anticipation to de-risk your supply chain, I think collaboration with your suppliers is key, right? But we are also saying you need to diversify. So there is a fine line between going too far on the diversification and becoming irrelevant for your current suppliers. So I want to make also clear that it is important to stay loyal and develop the power of partnerships and collaboration with your current suppliers. Because if you go too far and try to source for all kinds of suppliers, then you cannot count with your most loyal suppliers, right?
Yeah, and I guess from the sort of commercial sales side, a couple of things that we did. Obviously, we diversified, although as a subsea operator, there's only really two main suppliers for, transponders, et cetera, to light the services. But one of the key things that we did do was very much tighten up the pipeline and customer management with engineering, so they knew exactly the stage of each deal working its way through the business, and then they could pre-buy and pre-build those services when they were kind of at 90% in the funnel. So we got ahead of the curve that way. As I said, we diversified, we bought a lot of inventory that speculatively for future things, but I think the one thing that stood us ahead was probably the sales engineering engagement that we had.
I think that you're always going to have things that go wrong. And if you anticipate that and you've placed the customer first and foremost in terms of delivering on your commitments, then it's, having the mindset that says, are we learning from the things that go wrong? Are we implementing those lessons and, doing our best to anticipate what else could go wrong?
Very good. I do want to pick up on something that was just said about vertical integration. We hadn't really talked about that before. In our business, which is technical due diligence for investors, one of our clients, who's a fiber network provider, had us look and analyze a construction company, given the supply chain pressures that exist in terms of lining up construction resource. So that's an example of vertical integration. A fiber network provider that literally has in-house construction capabilities. Some have, some do not. You can sort of control your own destiny under those circumstances. And when that resource isn't needed in-house, you can in fact create a separate revenue stream. So anyway, vertical integration, is that something any of you have contemplated?
Yeah, I can speak up here. So at Infinite Electronics, we've actually taken a couple of steps in terms of vertical integration. We've had 2 recent acquisitions that got us deeper into the manufacturing process. So we provide connectivity solutions, cables, connectors, tunables, that type of thing. And so we've strategically made the step to go deeper into our supply chain so that we can control that manufacturing process. It gets us closer to raw materials. It gets us closer to those first, second, and third tier suppliers so that we have greater visibility to what's going on deeper in the supply chain. Therefore, we can absorb much of the risk that comes from supply chain disruptions for our customers.
Okay, no other examples of that? There was mention before of the Suez Canal, for example. To what extent have present and potential conflicts and disasters, man-made and natural, if you will, in different parts of the world, different regions, affected your approach to supply chain management?
So from a subsea perspective, the cables are very vulnerable anyway. I mean, they're vulnerable to weather, tsunamis, fishing trawlers, boats dropping anchors, et cetera, so we try and have at least 2 or 3 insurance policies in terms of marine insurance that we can use in any one region. A recent example actually was we had one of our one of our cable landing stations in the Middle East blown up as part of a rising out there, so that gave us a huge issue in terms of A, how do we get the equipment into a country in war, and B, how do we actually get the engineers there? But because we had already put a lot of plans in place from previous learnings, we were actually able to do that relatively quickly. The main issue we actually had was getting the equipment out of the airport and out of customs, but outside that we had various engineering forces that we can work with around the world.
I'd say we have an indirect impact from conflict. The war in Ukraine right now, I don't know how many people are familiar with, Ukraine actually produces over 50% of neon gas, which is a critical component of the photolithography process. So that has a downstream impact then on semi-component or semi-component manufacturing, which then impacts Zayo. So not directly to your question, but certainly an example of an ongoing conflict, having that ripple effect, if you will.
Anyone else feeling that?
Yeah, I think just if you look back at 50, 60 years ago, most manufacturing was done more locally. And then as globalization took effect, supply chains became longer and longer, greater and greater from an extension standpoint, extended supply chains. And the longer your supply chain is, the more risk you have. So I think in the last 5 years, this notion of globalization is starting to slow and reverse to an extent. So you have this notion of nearshoring, or I'm sure you've heard the term friendshoring now. You pick your friends, right? And you can trust. And so bringing those back closer to the end customer, I think, in effect, limits the impact of some of these far-reaching global significant disruptions.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on all of us to crawl upstream in our supply chains to find out where those vulnerabilities that David mentioned exist and pressure the people upstream to have contingency plans, whether it be diversification of manufacturing, seeking out additional sources of supply, because that trickles down to us.
Anyone else embracing nearshoring or friendshoring, as you called it?
Just stating the obvious again, as David said, globalization, some people say is dead, and now delocalization is becoming the norm, and nearshoring, friendshoring, it's just basically another trend that it's going to require more capex. It's going to require more R&D. So it's going to, force a lot of companies to, forget about the autopilot and look for constant and continuous ways of sourcing products and materials. And so I think that's good and bad. There's good things about that, but there's also obviously cost increase, and it makes you also more vulnerable to local and global shocks as well.
Yeah, you mentioned cost increase. I mean, supply chain is all about trade-offs, right? So cost, speed, resilience, these are all the key factors that we're trying to solve for. And so I think, we've found that you can set up low-cost manufacturing in all different regions of the world. It might continue to be China or another country in Asia. It might be Tunisia to get into Europe. It might be Mexico to get into North America. So there are options to continue to control cost. However, I'll just make one more comment. I think as an organization, you have to kind of figure out how much you're willing to spend for that resilience. So are you willing to take a 5-point margin hit to move that manufacturing to Mexico to get to North America to limit your potential of disruption?
How often are you adjusting that balance? How often are you prioritizing cost over resilience, over speed? I mean, is it a daily struggle? Is it a weekly, a monthly struggle to adjust that?
No, I think it's less frequent than that, but it's something that's constantly on the mind. Yeah, I mean, we're making decisions on where we want to manufacture products for specific markets. So, it's about balancing all those trade-offs.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd say similarly, we'll leverage like gray market providers. It's a solution that allows us to go fast in many cases, use availability, but it certainly, in most cases, doesn't come cheap. So, to Dave's point, there's that good, fast, cheap kind of situation going on. And,
how do you do QA on the gray market?
So, that's, most of the time we'll buy like new in box, or we'll do our own testing before putting it out into the market. And we've developed relationships with a handful of providers that we're confident do sufficient testing up front, and we'll leverage those providers, like I said, as needed if we have something that's hot and we just really can't wait for current intervals to delivery intervals.
Any other comments? No? It just occurred to me that given the new world of supply chains, that the procurement team has to have a different skill set than they may have had 5 years ago. We didn't talk about this question, but it's a question worth asking. If you had to profile the chief procurement officer in today's world, what skills does that person need?
Quick thought about that. This is dealing with supply chain constraint is not the procurement department's job only. It's R&D, it's product management, it affects the entire company at the end, because you have to really test new components, you have to try redesign the product. So it's not just a procurement department issue, it's the entire company.
I'd say it's become extremely technical, right? At least for our industry, much of our supply chain planning really was done inside of our technology organization. We are looking at alternate providers, alternate solutions to deliver, our day-to-day services. So, you kind of have to get scrappy, and it's more about finding something that you can support and you can deliver on timelines that you're committing to your customers with, and less about just going out chasing, the best deal, which I think, with a supply chain called pre-COVID, that was the primary focus, and it was much more strategic in that manner.
I agree with Aaron. The technical skill set has taken a huge leap in terms of importance, along with probably risk management.
Yeah, I'd say risk management, supply assurance, having supply assurance plans in place so that we can move quickly when disruptions do happen.
I'm just curious, given Fernando's earlier comment about building data centers differently, Aaron, are you at Zayo building networks perhaps differently? It's a loaded question, I know.
Well, I think we were kind of forced into it a bit. A lot of our similar or long-standing strategies, having vendor diversity, that's still consistent. We've, I'd say, been more aggressive at running RFPs and looking at bringing in alternate suppliers and putting more weight on the delivery intervals and ensuring that the suppliers can meet our demands than we have in the past. So that's been something that's been different, but in terms of how we're constructing our networks, it's the only thing that's really changing is maybe opening it up to a broader set of different suppliers, but our fundamental strategy of how we build the networks has been pretty much the same.
We haven't touched on, but I'm hoping we will, on the human capital piece of the equation, because in building networks, I think my company, Bluebird Network, does a very good job with the human capital piece of it. So,
go ahead.
Part of it has to do, I think, with the culture. Are you encouraging a culture where everybody's voice is appreciated and heard, different perspectives are being acknowledged, or are you doing it, the static way it's always been done? I think in any learning organization, making sure everybody's got a voice at the table is very important. Making sure you've got a breadth of experience and different backgrounds that all come to bear to help solve problems for our customers is critical.
Are you searching for talent in different ways than you have before?
I don't know about different ways. I'd say that Bluebird is very open to growing talent from within as well as going outside. I'm an example of that. I've got a different perspective. I bring a different view to the table, and they've been extremely welcoming and encouraged, me to stick my nose in all aspects of the business to see if I could help improve any of them.
Okay. Aaron, you have enough fiber splicers out there?
We're always looking to add to Zayo's, I guess, talented employee base. And I guess, to your earlier question, are we doing anything different? I think it's, largely the normal things there, social media, recruiters, but then, something different here. So pretty relevant attendee list. So Zayo's always hiring. Check out our career page. And we're always anxious to add great people to the team.
But you can't take any talent from this gentleman here. Maybe you can. Anyway, anyone else want to comment on the talent challenges?
Well, there's clearly talent. It's in short supply. I'm encouraged when I come to these big events. I don't know if it's because I'm getting old, or I see a lot of young people starting to, I see more and more young people in this event, so that's encouraging. But it is hard, and I think it's not just talent recruitment or bringing new talent. It's also talent development and talent retention are becoming very, very important in this industry. We are becoming a bit of an endogamic, same people moving around into different companies. So I think, again, it's not just recruiting or hiring new people, it's developing them and retaining them also as important as bringing new people.
Thank you. We've just got a few minutes left here. Any questions from the audience before we ask a few more? Okay. So as far as sort of taking out your crystal ball, you know, 5 years from now, I don't even know if you can look out 5 years, 3, 5 years from now, what do you think the state of the supply chain will be in your business?
Same or worse.
So optimistic of you, Fernando.
So certainly from our side, it's actually improving, and we hope it will continue to improve, and it'll actually drive new suppliers into the funnel. As we know, it's quite a unique thing that, you know, the two main ones, Sienna and Infinera, do, and it's taken a long time to scale those businesses and have the engineering understanding, etc. But we hope it's going to drive new entrants, whether it's, you know, there's a company called Pix as an example that sells used hardware equipment that we can procure from. So we hope that, you know, some new entrants are going to come in and continue to improve that. But it's really the diversification underneath those suppliers to ensure that they can carry on. I do think there's going to be a point where AI, as an example, is going to really hit the mainstream, and that's going to drive massive amounts of demand on certainly on subsea networks. So whether the supply chain can deal with something like that at this point in time, I don't know. But hopefully, you know, as we go forward and the lead times improve, we'll get to a point where we can you know, source the next big thing essentially.
David, earlier you had said it had been at 3 months, it went out and it came back to 8 months. Do you anticipate it going back to 3 months?
Unlikely, to be honest with you. I mean, 3 months was probably worst case pre-COVID. 8 months is pretty good, and that's a very recent change. I have to say, like literally the last sort of 4 weeks, that's come back down. Some telcos are still on a 12-month lead time. Some have come down, so it varies generally. I hope it will get back to that point because it, you know, it means we can deliver services a lot faster. But I'm not sure if it will do, to be honest.
John?
I think it'll stay stressed, but we'll all adapt to that stress. Stress becomes the new normal. I don't think we'll go back to a pre-COVID type environment. I think we just learn to live with and adapt to the new normal.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd agree with John. I think we sort of reset the bar, if you will, and have a new normal. I'd love to see things in 5 years, 3 years, go back to pre-COVID levels. I don't think that's going to happen. I think, you know, we're going to see, call it elevated delivery intervals from where we were, you know, continue to get a little bit better. But I think the other thing that will change is we'll be aware of the risks that are out there. You know, how different events can really have that ripple effect across supply chain and plan better for it. And, you know, there's a couple obvious ones that are out there. Obviously, everybody's familiar with, you know, what's happening around Taiwan. That's, you know, got to be top of mind. And then the other thing that I think that we've seen over COVID was other industries having technological advancements, right? Like, you think of the automotive industry, for instance, right? That now has put a, call it an unforeseen, right, or an unplanned for demand on very much the same components that I think power a lot of the technology that everyone on this panel uses.
I think we keep blaming COVID for the supply chain disruptions, and I think while that might be true, I think it's for the wrong reasons, because the biggest constraint for supply is demand. I think what David was saying is about this spike in demand, this, you know, now driven by AI and other trends. This is a supply-driven market. So we can't build enough. And the world, we tend to struggle when planning exponentially. We tend to plan always linearly. We see what has happened over the last 5 years, and we project linearly. But the future is exponential. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be coping with that demand. And we will be in a constrained supply for the foreseeable future. So we need to live with that.
Aaron, you mentioned Taiwan. I mean, is anyone sort of gaming out that possibility?
I can't say that we have directly. Have had conversation with many of our suppliers, and I think there's just good hygiene that's happening and reducing dependence on certain areas of the world for manufacturing. Many of them are bringing some manufacturing in-house or adding in diverse manufacturing locations, geographically diverse from Taiwan or other areas of exposure. So we're heavily dependent on their ability to implement against that strategy.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a diversification exercise that's going on, but I think there's a lot more factors going on. I think labor in Taiwan and China continues to accelerate. India is becoming more and more of a manufacturing power. So yeah, I think it's one of many factors that is creating a shift away from maybe Taiwan back even to the U.S. I mean, we've seen from a semiconductor standpoint, tens of billions of dollars that the U.S. government is investing to create manufacturing back home. So I think there's a lot of factors in play.
Yeah, my nephew happens to work for TSMC. He's coming back from 2 years in Taiwan, and he's going to be working at the new fabs in the Phoenix area. Evidently, the world's largest crane is in the desert there, helping to build those 6 or 7 fabs. So it's quite an undertaking, as you noted. So, another chance here from the audience? We do have a question. Excellent.
To your point about Taiwan not being dependent on those types of countries, even India, and the push for sustainability, where everybody wants to build clean pipelines, good business partners. How do those go together, and how do they impact lead times? With the sustainability, the push for sustainability.
For us, a component of selecting our vendors, and we've been, I'd say, it's become more and more of a focus of the RFPs that we run, is understanding what our suppliers' ESG goals and commitments are, and actually bringing it into the grading process of who we select to partner with. We've got our own goals, and a way that we're going to meet them is by partnering with folks that share the same sort of objectives from an ESG perspective.
Yeah, and similarly, we've just been through a big ESG survey ourselves, and actually we strangely got an email from one of our customers saying that we're impacting their carbon footprint, so can you give us this information? So I think it's certainly something that people are tightening up on, but it's more of a process to go through from our perspective anyway.
Great points. Our leadership team tracks and looks at those projects over time that are going to get us to those goals, and that obviously leads to conversations about cost and who we're partnering with and how they can help.
Very good. We have 10 seconds to go, so I think we'll call it at that. And thank you, gentlemen. This is very, very good. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. That was a really great session. Thank you for leading that, David. Up next, we have a presentation which looking at partners